Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. I hope all of you have enjoyed summer, wherever you are. Now that the calendar has rolled into August, it's time to at least partially turn our attention to the fast-approaching college football season. With us today on our Game Day segment will be beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive to share his early preseason thoughts on our Wolverines. First, a few of my thoughts to get us going. For football purposes, I like to refer to August as speculation month. Some schools, a handful of them, and you know who they are, know they will be in the hunt for a conference championship and a trip to the playoffs. The majority of schools might have a fair idea of how good or bad they are, but the truth of the matter is, no one is sure what they have until the season tees off in September. For we Michigan fans, questions abound. Can we rebound from a disaster of a COVID season? Will the coaching staff changes bear immediate positive results? Is Cade McNamara ready to be the man under center? Or is it just a matter of time before J.J. McCarthy is under center? You get the drift. Michigan football is surrounded by more questions than answers right now. Most of the preseason prognosticators see us as no better than 7-5. Some say with strong quarterback play and a better than expected defense, we could find a way to win 8, maybe 9 games. I know most of you don't want to hear that though. My inbox is filled with mail from fans who say, hey, it's year 7 of the Harbaugh era, and it's time to win. I agree, like most of you. But by winning, I think 7 or 8 games is unfortunately a realistic expectation this year. My guest today says we could be surprised, but until we see them play, he's in the 7-win club. Up next on our Game Day segment is Aaron McMann from MLive, so stay with us. Here with us on our Game Day segment this week as we begin pretty much a month of previews is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive, ready to get back to work. Great to have you with us, Aaron.
Yeah, it's good to be back, Mike. I remember this time last year, I didn't think we'd have a season, and now we know we're going to have a full 12-game schedule, and let's go. Let's do it.
I mean, everyone's chomping at the bit, no doubt about it, and of course, this is the month when all of college football will begin practice, and the excitement, of course, is going to build each week. It is just, as you said, great to have college football back, and hopefully in a normal atmosphere.
Yeah, as of right now, I think Michigan is planning on having a full stadium. I know that isn't definitive at this point, but I know they've been selling tickets like they planned on. Season ticket sales, as far as I've seen, have been pretty good, been pretty brisk. Yeah, hopefully we can pack the stadium this fall, and it's back to normal college game day experience for everyone.
Let's hope so. I mean, everyone is ready for that. And last year, the strangest year in most of our lifetimes, getting through COVID, the college football season was a mess in more ways than one for Michigan. Looking back on that season, that abbreviated COVID season, how much stock can we put in what we saw from that Michigan team last year?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it was really a confluence of a lot of things. Things started off with players opting out. You saw guys like Nico Collins and Ambry Thomas, 2 key figures of the roster, kind of opt out before the season got going. So from the very beginning, Michigan was kind of behind the 8 ball. Then you throw in all the distractions and COVID and them not having spring practice. And, that's not an excuse because most programs across the country, did a little practice last spring. So I think there's some to take away. Just, I think the lack of depth at certain positions, some of the, lack of talent at certain areas certainly is something to read into. But at the same token, I think you saw a lot of guys get playing experience last year that maybe wouldn't have under normal circumstances. Players like a Taylor Upshaw, So you saw like a DJ Turner in the cornerbacks, get a little bit a run there. You saw the emergence of Cade McNamara. So I think you saw more experimenting and more tinkering from the coaching staff than maybe you would have under normal circumstances. And I think you learned some things there. Now, whether that translates to the field this fall remains to be seen. But they did go 2-4. They struggled, and I think there's going to be some more struggles this year. They did learn some things about themselves, and I think that's certainly a positive you can take away from last year's nightmare season.
Clearly, Jim Harbaugh thought last year's nightmare season signaled it was time for some changes, and he made plenty of them to his staff in the offseason. Whether or not this will make a difference is going to take time to determine, isn't it?
Yeah, especially with the new coordinator on the defensive side of the ball. I mentioned this in other interviews, and I'll say the same thing here. Remember a couple of years back when he kind of changed things on the offensive side of the ball and hired Josh Gaddis as new coordinator. It took that offense, a good 6 games to kind of get going, to kind of acclimate and the like. And that was with an experienced, a group coming back. This year, the defense a little bit different. They got a lot of holes to figure out. They got things still to figure out. They did have a spring to kind of tinker with some of that stuff and kind of find an identity. What that is remains to be seen. But don't be surprised if this defense is slow out of the gates. In more ways than one. I mean, they're going to be a little bit more different from an alignment standpoint to what we've seen in years past. They've got some unknowns, especially at linebacker, kind of behind the second, third options. They're still trying to figure out a starter at corner. A lot of things to figure out. And then obviously we haven't even touched on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, there's just so many question marks there too. How the running backs are going to fit, who's going to play quarterback. It's going to be an interesting group. I think there's probably given the opt-outs of last year and everything else, but maybe more unknowns this year than they had last year. Now, like I said, they were able to kind of go through last year, figure out what they had in certain areas. So I think it's going to help. But again, with so many changes on the defensive side of the ball, that just doesn't kind of come together overnight. I mean, it's going to take time. They got to play together. They got to play against other offenses. It's one thing to practice against your offense in practice, but it's a different beast going up against another team.
Absolutely, it is. As we mentioned, camp opens soon, and the quarterback position is going to be under the microscope, as it always is with Michigan and other teams. Cade McNamara was named the starter after spring practice, and at Big Ten Media Days, Jim said he was the clear leader. And, fans I talk to, I don't know what it is, they seem to be sort of lukewarm on Cade, but it sounds like from a staff perspective, at least, he's earned the job up to this point, and he seems like a lock for at least September, doesn't he?
Yeah. I think it's his job to lose at this point. He's the front runner. He's the guy that I think the coaching staff feels most comfortable with. And that's really, it's an interesting situation because, I don't say it's not saying much, but they just don't have a lot of experience in that room at this point. You've got J.J. McCarthy. I think the one guy fans have been clamoring they really want to see play because of his 5-star status and coming out of high school. But the reality is he hasn't played it down in college football yet. He's still learning the offense. He's still kind of getting his bearings around him. Yes, he enrolled early back in January, but, it takes time. And if you look at Jim Harbaugh's track record as a head coach at the college level, he doesn't like playing through freshman quarterbacks much, if at all. I mean, if you go down the line here at Michigan, he never plays them. So I guess it's not a surprise to see J.J. McCarthy, being thrown into the fire right away. And then you got Dan Villari, an unproven guy who's, again, the late addition to the recruiting class a couple of years ago. That I just don't think the coaching staff is very comfortable, playing at this point. Now, the wild card in the quarterback situation in the room, going into fall camp is the new addition, the grad transfer from Texas Tech, Alan Bowman.
Yeah.
He's the wild card here. I mean, he's the more experienced guy. He started at Texas Tech. He played in the air raid offense. He's definitely the most decorated, most accomplished. Now, the question with him is, how quickly he can adapt and learn the offensive scheme at Michigan, and whether or not he beats out Cade McNamara. I don't think he certainly would get the job right away, but he certainly, I think, in my opinion, I think will put up the biggest fight here in camp. Again, but the issue running against him is time. He's not only going to have 4 weeks to show it. Maybe he can. But I do think Cade McNamara starts the season as a starter. Whether that ends up being the case, as the season goes on, remains to be seen. If Michigan struggles out the gate, whether it's at the quarterback spot or elsewhere offensively, I would not be surprised if you see Jim throw in, throw in a JJ or throw in an Alan Bowman. But at this point, it seems like Cade certainly is the clear front runner.
Yeah, I think it's the fan base that is a little antsy. They expected JJ, if he was a 5-star, if he was as good as advertised, that like a lot of other schools, he's going to walk right into the job. But that rarely happens. And as you mentioned, it hardly ever happens with Jim, does it?
Yeah, exactly. He seems a little hesitant to do it, and that's his right. He played the position. He knows the pressure that goes with it, especially when you're that young. You're just coming out of high school, and you're at a place like Michigan. The fan base is rabid. They love the quarterback. They clamor to them, and sometimes they're just not ready. And that's just the reality of the situation. I think that's the case with JJ. He's a talented individual. Probably has the strongest arm in the room. Maybe the smartest quarterback in the room. But that just because you have all those traits doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be thrown out there day one and expected to go get it. You've got to earn that right. You got to earn that role. And as of right now, Cade McNamara has that. He's shown flashes of elite play last year. I mean, they threw him in there kind of just to see what they had, and he turned out to be quite the gamer. And sometimes you learn about guys and you get thrown out of games. Maybe they play better in games than they do in practice. Maybe they're able to read defenses better. And so far, I think they're most confident in Cade, and that's why you've seen him. That's why you see him at 1 in the depth chart, and J.J. McCarthy at 2.
Well, at media days, Jim spoke glowingly about his running backs, Hassan Haskins, Blake Corum, and true freshman Donovan Edwards. And there is for sure more talent behind those guys. The running back room, Aaron, is as deep and talented, at least on paper, as we've seen on years, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Hassan's he's been leading back here the last couple of years. He's really good between the tackles. They let him get kind of yards after contact. It sounds like at this point they're going to kind of roll with him and Blake at least 1-1. Jim called it 1-1 at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard that in years past. It sounds like the carries are largely going to be split between those two. But I do think you'll see Donovan Edwards in some situations this year. Maybe it's similar to a Blake Corum last year where he's catching balls out of the backfield. They throw him in there in certain situations. But I think Michigan learned a lot last year from their situation where they were giving 3 and 4 guys carries. It's just too many. They got to get a guy rhythm. They got to get a guy comfortable in there. And I think right now, with Hassan coming back and Blake, I think those are two best case scenarios right now. But the depth is really good. Even if one of those guys goes down to injury, whatever the case may be, you've got a definitive number one there either way. And that's it's been a couple of years since Michigan can say that. So I think it's going to give a big boost to the offense, especially with a inexperienced starter at quarterback. But yeah, I expect Michigan to lean on the running back room quite a bit this year, especially early on.
And you mentioned last year it was getting on everyone's nerves. The 3 and 4 running backs game seemed like no one could get in a rhythm when the offense could get the ball. That's why I think we're very interested in watching Mike Hart's impact on this offense and the rotation, because if you look at Indiana and where he's been, he sort of likes to go with 1 or 2 guys, doesn't he?
Exactly. In Indiana, that's exactly what they did. They basically rolled with one guy to kind of complement their passing game, and that's kind of how it worked. So yeah, the coaching change was, I think, a dramatic change in philosophy. Jay Harbaugh wanted to get everyone involved and see what they had. And he was more of a competitive guy and wanted to necessarily roll with the hot hand, so to speak. But yeah, with Mike, you get a different philosophy and a different approach to the run game. And I think that'll do wonders. He's obviously a proven running back at Michigan. He's done a very good job as an assistant coach at the college level. I'm really curious to see his development. This is next couple of years with Donovan Edwards, see how he grows as a running back. Because let's face it, Hassan, he's been here for a few years now. He's got a year left. Blake Corum's got several years, so he's got time to develop. But I think the lack of talent development at the running back room the last couple of years has been an issue. And with Hart there, he's shown that he can do that. I think if you give him a couple of years, Michigan could be pretty good at the running back position.
Well, along with his offensive coordinator duties, Josh Gaddis is coaching the wide receiver group, which on paper has a lot of talent. You have Ronnie Bell, Mike Sanderstill, Cornelius Johnson, Roman Wilson, and a lot of others. And I think most fans would say it's time for at least a few of these guys to step up this year, Aaron, and break through. We just need more from that position, don't we?
Yeah, it feels like we talk about this every year. You know, the potential in the receiving room. I mean, they've got a lot of bodies there. They've got a lot of high 3, 4, and 5-star recruits, guys whose ceilings are really high. Now it's about kind of, you know, getting a couple of them to grow and break through. Ronnie Bell, I think, is a good start. I mean, he's a guy who obviously was very under-recruited out of high school. In fact, Michigan's one of the few, you know, Power 5 FBS offers he got. But there's a perfect example there of talent development. They've grown him into their top option. He was number 1 receiver last year. He's a good kind of slot guy, but I do think Michigan needs a complementary 2 and 3 guy. You know, we thought Giles Jackson was going to be that guy. He opted to transfer in the offseason. They'll end up facing in week 2 against Washington, but they've got to find some other guys. You know, I like Cornelius Johnson. He's a perfect example. He could be, you know, another kind of Donovan Peoples-Jones type guy. I mean, he's tall, he's lanky, he can go up and get the ball. And I think they've really got to target him this year. But again, like, there's others out there too, like you mentioned. You know, Mike Sanders still is a guy I think they're counting on largely. And you got some young guys down there too. But it's going to come back. I mean, quarterback play is going to be key. Last year, at times, you know, Joe Milton struggled, you know, to find receivers, you know, get the ball, you know, there on time. And certainly that's going to hurt your receiver play. But same token, the guys got to sign out to get open. They have to figure out how to get open and catch the ball. You know, and Josh Gass is a proven receivers coach. He did it at Alabama. He's you know, he's shown glimpses here at Michigan. Yeah, I mean, Michigan's receiver room, as we talk about all the time, the potential's there. With good to, you know, great quarterback play, they can be even better. Bodies are there. They just have to go up and get it. You know, the one name I didn't mention that I think was an interesting addition the offseason was Dalen Baldwin, the transfer from Jackson State. You know, he was kind of under the radar recruit from the Detroit area. Michigan didn't really, you know, entertain or offer him out of high school, but he really excelled in the SWAC. He had a really good season last year. You know, in the spring, he could be a wild card here. He can play outside or inside. He's got good length, good ball skills. I'm curious to see how he kind of fits into the room. But it's clear in talking to him the last couple of months that Josh Gass really liked what they saw and was really eager to add him to the room.
Well, Jay Harbaugh is back handling tight ends, and a lot of observers think that's where he fits best and does his best work. His projected starter is Eric All, but you also have Luke Schoonmaker, Matt Hibner, and young Lewis Hanson. All very talented guys, big guys, but another position group. They've got to hang on to the ball, and we've got to get more from them.
Yeah, Eric All is the guy we heard a lot about last offseason. You know, his physique and his athleticism, and he looks like a football player. He looks like a prototypical tight end. He just, you know, he had, like you said, he had trouble catching the ball last year. And you wonder if that's a mental thing, if that was just, you know, Joe Milton's, you know, heavy hand, heavy arm. You know, you don't know. I think he'll obviously get an opportunity here early in the year. He as of right now is the number 1 target, going to be the number 1 target tight end. But you wonder how much they're going to utilize the tight end position, because it almost seems like, you know, since Josh Gass has gotten here, they've started to de-emphasize the spot. You know, obviously not entirely, because they do like to use it. But with so many receivers, you know, available to them, they've been using the running back out of the backfield quite a bit in pass catching situations. We saw that last year with Chris Evans. Like I said earlier, we'll probably see that more with Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum this year. But, you know, the opportunities for the tight ends to catch the ball are becoming, you know, fewer. So that you know, that puts a premium on, you know, the tight ends to make plays when they're given them. So I expect Eric All will be the number 1 guy. You'll probably see him utilized the most. Luke Schoonmaker's a guy we've heard, you know, bits and pieces about the last couple of years. Again, they like his athleticism and everything else. But, you know, given the state of this offense and where they're at right now, I don't think there's much room for 2 tight ends on the field. So Eric All will be the guy. We'll see how many opportunities he gets. But he's certainly got to hold on to the football. Otherwise, yeah, they'll be forced to make a change there.
Well, Sharon Moore is handling, in my mind, the most important group on this team other than quarterback, and that's your offensive line. It sounds like we have some battles going on in the trenches as camp opens, which is always good. But right now, Vistardis at center, Stuber at right tackle, Filiaga left guard, left tackle Ryan Hayes, and Trevor Keegan at left guard. That is a very, very good group, and they have pretty darn good depth behind them, don't they, Aaron?
I'm really bullish on the offensive line. I think they could be really good. They got, like you said, they got a lot of guys coming back, a lot of experience. They really only lost Jalen Mayfield last year, so they got some guys that have been there a while. They've been in the system for a while. You wonder, with the coaching change, with Ed Warner going out and Sharon Moore coming in, how that's necessarily going to change things. But that being said, yeah, I think they're going to be really good. Ryan Hayes, I'm a big believer in. The coaching staff has talked him up. Even I can remember a couple of years ago when he was a true freshman, they liked what they saw out of him. He is a bona fide tackle. He could be, could be very much be a potential first round pick in the NFL draft, just like a Jalen Mayfield. If he can, have an exceptional year, and whether he comes back or not remains to be seen. But I like what they got there. Jim Harbaugh at media days last week, mentioned a couple battles left guard. Trevor Keegan, and you mentioned Chuck Filiaga. Interestingly enough, we saw Filiaga a bunch last year. He started pretty much the entire year, but Jim said he's been a standout offensive lineman in the spring and the off season. So I'm wondering, where he stands with regards to Keegan. I wouldn't surprise me if Keegan starts at, could start at left, Filiaga bumps over to right, and then we've got a competition at center too, with Andrew Vistardis and Zach Zinter. I kind of assumed coming into the offseason that Vistardis would be the guy. He's played there a ton, but Michigan really likes what they have in Zinter, and they think he can play center or guard. And then obviously we got Stuber at right tackle. So Michigan they think they've got some versatility there in the inside, whether it's center and guards. It sounds like they're going to kind of go back to the philosophy of a couple of years ago, where they're going to go with their 5 best linemen and kind of move and shift them as needed. But yeah, the depth is there. I mean, they got a bunch of guys there. Ed Warner did a very good job recruiting guys and bringing them in and kind of developing them and kind of shaping them. And I think Michigan's offensive line stands to be a good. Probably, in my opinion, could be one of their best units on the offensive side of the ball.
No, I agree. And I think the offense, while it has a lot of questions, I think most of us feel that it could take off and be very, very good by midseason or late season. It's the defensive side that worries most fans. Sean Nua is handling the D-line now. He has Aiden Hutchinson back, along with Chris Hinton and Donovan Jeter. Mozzie Smith is projected to join that group as a starter or get a lot of time. Depth is an issue, but if healthy, at least the starting group should be pretty solid, Aaron, shouldn't they?
Yeah, and you got Aiden Hutchinson there. We'll start with him. I mean, he's a potential All-American. His name has popped up on a couple of preseason watch lists. He should be their playmaker up front this year. He is coming off injury. Didn't really practice much in the spring. He kind of went through individuals, but didn't go much 11-11. I don't know how much that's going to affect him and how much different he's going to look compared to a couple years ago. But he's a guy they're going to have to lean on. And he realizes it. He takes the responsibility, and he believes that this could be his year. But they've really got to get pass rush. That was a big issue last year. They failed to get much pressure on the quarterback. And look, that was the identity of Don Brown's defense. You got to get the quarterback and sack, and we didn't see it a ton last year. But yeah, depth is going to be an issue. Taylor Upshaw's back. We saw a little bit of him last year. I don't know how much of a disruptor he can really truly be. But the one thing that we've been hearing a lot about this offseason is, defensive coordinator Mike McDonald's plan to kind of use, Aiden and Taylor kind of as outside linebackers, as guys kind of as edge rushers, as opposed to putting their hand on the ground. They might be standing up a little bit more, and maybe potential 3-4 look or some different alignment. But yeah, the last couple of years, Michigan's issue up front has really been depth, inside, and I do think they're a little bit in a better situation this year. You're going to see obviously Chris sitting back. Michigan is expecting big things from Mozzie Smith. He could potentially start or definitely be a number 2. You got Donovan Jeter in there as well, so Michigan could easily go with a 3-4 look with 3 down defensive tackles, traditional defensive tackles. Because look, in the past, under Don Brown, he's really recruited undersized guys. He wanted more athletic, speedy guys as opposed to those big, bulkier dudes. And I think with McDonald coming in, you're starting to see a slight change in the way they recruit. They added a big 350-pound defensive tackle, Jordan Whitley from Oregon State this offseason, to kind of bolster that in the middle. So it's clear that they're recruiting bigger. They're trying to bring in bigger guys. I think you're going to see more of a usage of the traditional defensive tackles this fall.
Well, behind that defensive line, George Hilo is in his first year handling the linebackers, and that group has plenty to prove. Josh Ross and Michael Barrett are back, And then you have David Ajabo expecting to see situational use. At least that's what I've been reading so far. We just don't know what we're going to get from this group, do we, Aaron?
No, and I think that's where the depth issues are going to come into play. You know, you mentioned Josh Ross and Michael Barrett. Those are certainly going to be the two stars at linebacker. But after that, I mean, it's bare bones. You got a lot of guys who just haven't played or underclassmen, true freshmen, a lot of unknowns there. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen Michigan kind of make a cognizant shift with their usage of Aiden and Taylor Upshaw. I mean, I think you're going to see those two drop back quite a bit, as I mentioned, as outside linebackers to fill the holes of just the lack of talent there at linebackers that Michigan has had in the past. They're probably going to rely on Michael and Josh there in the middle quite a bit. You know, I spoke to Josh last week at Big Ten Media Days, and he anticipates being used a little bit more in a downhill role, rushing the quarterback, which would be interesting to watch because he's played more of a traditional middle linebacker role in the past. But yeah, I mean, depth is going to be an issue there. They got a lot of things to figure out. David Ajabo is a name we've heard quite a bit, but we just haven't seen much in games. I know in the past they were kind of prepping him to be that kind of next Viper type guy. That role, as far as we know, doesn't exist anymore. So for him and Michael Barrett, who was the old Viper, they've got to change their roles and change their bodies. It sounds like Barrett's, lost a little bit of weight, or gained a little bit of weight. So it's going to be interesting to see how they're used. But depth is certainly an issue there at linebacker because if Barrett and or Ross go down due to injury at this point, they're going to struggle there. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're starting to see some of these defensive ends change their abilities, because Michigan's going to have to compensate for the struggles there in the middle. And I think they're going to have to do it one of two ways: either use defensive linemen in different ways, or go with 5 defensive backs, which we'll get to here in a minute, I'm sure.
The secondary has more than a few guys that are a cut above. You start with Dax Hill, Brad Hawkins, Jamin Green. If they avoid injuries, that secondary has a chance to be very, very good, doesn't it?
Yeah, they've got depth there. Now it's really about figuring out that cornerback position, because last year, as we all know, it struggled. They gave up some big plays in the Michigan State-Indiana games. They had to compensate at times for just a lack of speed, and I think that's the key to the success of the defensive secondary. I mean, yeah, Daxton Hill's probably one of the better defenders on the team. He's got speed and everything else. And you got Brad Hawkins, the senior back. But who starts at the corner and how they do developing those guys, I think it's going to be key to whether this defense can be a cohesive unit. We spoke to Jim Harbaugh last week at Big Ten Media Days. He said Jamin Green is right now a front runner for one of those starting spots. But interestingly enough, Vincent Gray, who was last year was called the best cornerback on the team, is being pushed by DJ Turner for the other starting role. Whether that's because Green has, whether Gray has struggled this year in spring, or DJ Turner's really made a push, remains to be seen. But the fact that Gray's being pushed probably is a good thing. But you've got other guys there. Andre Selden, has come up. Darren Green Warren. There's Jalen Perry who played a little bit last year. So they've really got a lot of guys that have been kind of at Michigan at least for a couple of years, that they know how to play. They've been around some of the starters. They could be thrown in there. It's just a matter of how Michigan kind of wants to utilize them and who's the cream of the crop. But they've certainly got to get that quarterback situation figured out. It was probably the Achilles heel of that entire team last year. It cost them the Michigan State game. And if they can get that together, I do think they'll stand a chance. I mean, cause they can do some certain things that, like I said, kind of hide the struggles and the lack of depth at linebacker. And by doing that, throwing more guys in the backfield in the passing game. So, yeah, you like on the surface, you like what you see there. You got more experience, and you got some really talented guys there at safety and Dak still. It's just a matter of kind of putting it together and watching them grow. And I said this last year, but I thought as the season went on last year, Jamin Green really showed some flashes, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's been declared a starter. I like his size. It seemed like he was getting comfortable as the season went on last fall. I think he could be a very good quarterback if you give him a full year or two to kind of develop here.
Well, new defensive coordinator Mike McDonald, as you mentioned a moment ago, is a very important factor this year too, Aaron. How he utilizes his talent is said to be much different than Don Brown. He's not wedded to a defensive philosophy as Don was. He likes to adapt to his talent, which I think is an NFL trait. Even with all that considered, he has a big job on his hands, doesn't he?
Yeah, and you hear that a lot from new coaches, whether it's a head coach coming in, new coordinator. they've kind of got to work with the talent they have in the room, and sometimes it's bare, and as we've talked about here today, it's, the linebackers are lacking depth. They have some kind of fulfilled guys up front and over the middle. You got some spots at cornerback, so you've really got to work, assess your talent, look at where you have where you have a depth and where you have the most talent, and kind of utilize them. It's the old philosophy of accentuate your positives and hide your negatives. And in Michigan's defensive situation this year, your positives are Aiden Hutchinson, Dax Hill. So how do you accentuate them and maximize their talent? And I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen a concerted effort to play Aiden Hutchinson kind of more freely. And then I think you're going to see Dax Hill used quite a bit this year, whether it's as a free safety or whether it's maybe perhaps a nickel where he can kind of get all over the field or kind of do what he wants. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting season, I think, for Mike Macdonald. I don't think the pressure necessarily should be on him just yet. He's got a lot of things to figure out. They still got to kind of recruit to what they want to do. And it remains to be seen what they really want to do, what the end goal is here, because a lot of times new coaches come in and talk about, they want to do this or they want to do that, or they don't really have an identity or scheme yet. And that's kind of the case, I think, here, because you're coming from a system that was very much blitz the quarterback, into the quarterback, play free and athletic. We saw the results there. They didn't tend to fare well against the upper echelon of the Big Ten. They didn't fare well in the big games. So you got to come in and change things. And I think Macdonald realizes that. Jim Harbaugh knows that. In talking to players and staff members, it sounds like Jim Harbaugh is giving a little bit more effort on defensively. He's been more, apparent in meetings, and he's showing his face more on the defensive side of the ball. So I think you're going to see a little bit more influence from him this year as well. They realized changes needed to happen, things needed to kind of, change, and they're certainly underway. How long that takes to happen, to kind of mold, remains to be seen. I think this year is certainly going to be kind of a challenge. I think it's going to take some time to get going, but I certainly think we'll start to see an identity, of what Mike Macdonald really wants to run, maybe perhaps toward the back half of the season.
Well, at this time of the year, it seems we don't tend to talk about the kicking game a lot in the preseason, but when the rubber meets the road, there's plenty of times you realize that element of the game is huge, and wins and losses can swing on that kicking game. We have Jake Moody back handling field goals and kickoffs, Brad Robbins at punter. And while they might not be great, they are both solid legs coming back, aren't they, Aaron?
Yeah, that's, I guess, one of the good things about Michigan having depth at both spots the last couple of years, where they had kind of two starters at both roles. They lose two guys, but they get two back. So I think they'll be just fine. Jay Harbaugh is going to kind of head the special teams like he did last year. So a familiar face, he kind of knows what he has there. I think you're going to see a lot of the younger guys too on special teams, as is usually the case. But yeah, Jake Moody is a guy we've seen plenty before. He's pretty consistent. Doesn't have the strongest leg in the world, but he certainly can hit those 50-yard field goals when you need them. And then, if don't forget, Brad Robbins a couple of years ago had a very good year. So it's not like these guys haven't been in this role before. I think it should bolster the special teams. I think they should be just fine. And yeah, I mean, in close games, obviously kicking matters. And I think Moody can be the guy. He's as I said, very consistent. He knows his business. He's very calm and collected. And I think he'll be just fine at both spots.
Well, a final question for you, Aaron, before we let you get away. Most of the preseason magazines and websites have Michigan ending the season with a 7-5 record. That seems to be the overall. And if they get improved play at quarterback, maybe even 8 or 9 wins. And I know it's a tough question to answer in August, but this is speculation month. We won't know for a while what we have. But right now, how many games do you see this Michigan team having a realistic chance to win?
I'm right around that 7 wins mark. I think they could perhaps pull off 8. I wouldn't be surprised if they go 6-6. I do think that week 2 game at home against Washington is going to be very interesting, and I think could blow the winds of the season. If they win that game, it's very possible they start the season 4-0, which I think gives them confidence and gets them going, and could help come Big Ten season time. But this schedule is difficult. I mean, they got to go to Wisconsin. a place they haven't won in a few games now. They have to go to Penn State, a place they haven't won in a while now either. And then obviously you got the game at the end of the season against Ohio State. So I think there are 3 losses right there if you chalk them up. And you got, they have to go to Nebraska, which I think is going to be a unique game this year. It's a lot of unknowns. You got Michigan State on the road. So looking at the schedule, I'm thinking 7-5 is probably a realistic, mark there. I wouldn't expect them to compete for the Big East title. In fact, my preseason ballot, I think I had them 4th in the Big Ten East as well, behind obviously the Ohio States and Indianas and Penn States. Could they knock off, pull off an upset perhaps at Penn State? Certainly. I mean, it's Penn State I didn't think was very good last year either. They got some things to figure out as well. But given the unknowns on defense, the depth, the lack of depth at certain spots, kind of the youth and inexperience around the board. It's I wouldn't expect, for a fan, I would not expect them to compete for Big Ten title. I think, Jim has probably 2 years here to prove. This is kind of going to be a ID type of year where they have to kind of establish themselves, their identity on defense, find a quarterback, find some playmakers on offense. And I think next year, will be a realistic chance of them competing again. But right now, after their poor year last year, the tough schedule, especially in the Big Ten side this year, I'm thinking 7-5 is probably likely.
I agree with that. It won't make the fans happy, but it realistically sounds right. Here with us on our game day segment this week as we begin the month of August and pretty much a month of previews has been beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. As always, Aaron, great to have you on the show, and the next time we chat, it will be during the season. So until then, enjoy what's left of summer, and we look forward to that next visit.
Thanks, Mike. You too.
On Quick Hits today, when practice gets underway, we'll have more to talk about. Maybe. It's usually like pulling teeth to get information about the team until we start the season, but we will do our level best in the coming weeks to share with you what we know. In these coming weeks, we will continue the previews, getting as many of our beat writers on the show as possible to share their thoughts on the upcoming season. So I hope you'll stay with us. In September, our schedule will once again feature 2 shows weekly. Early in the week, the visitors edition of the program, with a writer or broadcaster sharing their thoughts on that week's opponent. Then later in the week, our Michigan Game Day show, featuring one of our own writers or media personalities. Now, we've been doing it that way for several years now, and most of you I hear from seem to enjoy that format, so we'll stay with it. That will do it for our first show of the month. As I said a moment ago, we'll be back next week with another of our beat writers. We just aren't sure who yet, so make sure you tune back in. It is great to be preparing for another season of Michigan football, and we all hope and pray it will be a normal season from a fan perspective as far as attending the games goes. Ticket sales have been brisk, and we all can't wait to see the big house packed once again. It has been a long wait. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!